Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you all the books that I ended up reading in the month of October and the books that I plan on reading in November. So I can officially say that I am out of my summer reading slump. I read a total of 6 books this month, and some of them were like pretty chunky, so I feel pretty impressed with myself, especially having only read like basically from July, I want to say like June and July, I only read like 4 books. And so I read a total of 6 books this month. So I feel like I'm finally getting back into a nice reading routine, which I'm really excited about. And they were kind of all over as I kind of look at my notes that I've done in my bullet journal. They're kind of all over in terms of genre too. And for the most part, I enjoyed all the books that I ended up reading, and that you can tell they kind of have a very similar kind of witchy vibe to them. I was just really into kind of a witchy vibe with my reading this month, so as you can kind of see. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So the first book that I read was actually an audiobook, and it is Come As You Are. And this is one that I've heard really great things about. It's really well reviewed. And I find with nonfiction, I tend to enjoy kind of audiobooks, listening through as audiobooks. So this one talks about kind of sex basically for women in terms of how it is, you know, different for everyone, and it's okay. There's no like normal, everyone is different. And if you ever thought like, oh, is it normal that I'm like this in a certain way, it kind of talks into how everyone is very unique, and there's a lot of variability in terms of what is considered normal. I did find it very informative, and I think it does a really good job at having like a positive perspective on the topic and showing people that, you know, you don't need to be embarrassed. Like there's a lot of like what we think about what women should be like in this area is very much defined through a misogynistic like male view lens, especially when it's like talked about in media, and how this is like that's not actually the case, and that's okay if you don't fall into that like how men kind of categorize it. So it was really interesting. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was very informative. I did learn a lot of things. And I think this is a book that everyone needs to read because, again, you just learn so much more about yourself and just how much kind of the patriarchy shape how we define ourselves and how we see ourselves in that way. So it was very interesting. I did feel like towards the end it started to get a little bit repetitive, but overall I really enjoyed this. Like I said, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Socery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, and this was a book that I was really excited about because especially when I was getting towards the end of like my dissertation and preparing to defend, I like marathon through the Cruel Prince trilogy by Holly Black, and so I was kind of craving that kind of YA fantasy vibe, and especially like I feel like YA genre is very hit or miss, but I feel like especially like the Cruel Prince and this one skew a little bit older, so I think I just tend to enjoy that a little bit more. And yeah, this one I loved. It follows Elizabeth, who is a librarian, and the way this kind of world is set up is the librarians are the ones that protect the world or like their society from grimoires, and when a grimoire escapes, Elizabeth is accused of being the one behind it, so she gets sent away, and it kind of goes off from there. This one I really loved. I think Elizabeth was such a strong, really fun character, and I love seeing her grow throughout the course of the novel, and especially being a standalone, I feel like this did a really good job at summarizing everything and concluding the storyline within the kind of the pages that it had. And so I really appreciate that. It's really nice just to read a standalone fantasy where you don't have to commit to more like several books. And yeah, this one was fun. There were some like YA things that I just did find a little bit annoying, where it was very, very obvious who the villain was, but I still really enjoyed it. I felt like the world building was a lot of fun, and getting to explore like the libraries and Elizabeth kind of really owning into her uniqueness, which I really enjoyed. And there's kind of a like romance in here as well. I wouldn't say it's like the focal point, but it does kind of play a background in it, and I did really love the like growth and development of seeing this friend, or this like, it was kind of like rivals, not even rivals, but like hate to love almost, which I kind of enjoy, and this was just a lot of fun to read. And like I said, I've heard great things about this, so I had high expectations going into it, but it was a lot of fun, and just kind of reading it as the weather was starting to get colder with like a cozy library vibe was just a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm finally happy. I'm very happy that I finally picked this one up. Next up, I ended up picking up The Bone Orchard by Sara A. Mueller. This is a book my now fiance recommended. He was my boyfriend originally when he recommended this one, but I was holding out reading this one until kind of around this time. But it follows this woman named Charm, who's kind of known as kind of running a house of prostitutes, and she is very much called upon by the emperor. But one day she gets tasked by the emperor, who's on his deathbed, to find the son who is responsible for his death. So she's kind of very much torn between avenging his death and then also kind of getting her freedom. But what is unique about Charm is that she has this kind of bone orchard where she kind of grows her own people or living things from bones that grow in her garden at the back of her house, and it kind of goes in from there. This one was, I will say, it's very confusing. I felt like I was very confused for most of the book until you kind of figure out what is going on. I gave this a kind of 3 3/4 out of 5 stars. And sorry, I forgot to mention, but I gave Sorcery of Thorns a 4 out of 5 stars. But this one I think is really interesting. It does have a very good kind of twist with fantasy and feminism, which I really enjoyed, kind of getting that perspective, and how kind of women are very much forced into a lot of their situations as a form of survival, which I did think was really interesting. There is a lot of other kind of subplots going on in terms of kind of colonialism, like all these other things that are in amongst the kind of the main plot. But it was really interesting. Like I said, it was very confusing, and I think like the payoff that you get, especially at the last 100 pages, where you kind of pull the threads together to really kind of understand what is going on. I think the payoff is really worth it, and that kind of build up that we kind of get until the climax was just really a lot of fun and definitely worth it. But like I said, I would say like you kind of have to power through the confusion and not really knowing what is going on most of the time, and I think that's done intentionally, where you're trying to kind of figure out what is going on with the one character in particular, with Charm, and kind of what is going on and why she can grow these kind of bone ghosts essentially. But yeah, I think this was a really unique read, and definitely something that is a standout in terms of not only like themes but also plot as well. But I will say you kind of have to power through this one. I was like really interested. I think what kind of really motivated me was that the plot was just so interesting that I was just trying to kind of figure out, and I was willing to kind of push through the confusing parts to kind of really figure this out. And I will say the kind of build up is definitely worth it. So continuing on with the witchy theme, I next read The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandanna, and this one was just a very lighthearted read compared to like the dark intensity of The Bone Orchard, so I felt like it gave me a little bit of a break from that like intensity, because I will say this is more of like a cozy fantasy. And yeah, this one follows a witch, I forget her name, Micah Moon, who gets approached by this like couple who is basically the caretaker of this estate, and they ask her to teach the 3 young witches who live there how to control their powers. And it kind of takes off from there, and while she's living at this kind of estate, she ends up falling in love with the librarian. It goes from there. This one was just like very cute, and it was, like I said, it was very much a cozy fantasy. I felt like it was very low stakes, especially compared to The Bone Orchard. This one was very like low stakes, very easygoing. Like it was just kind of very cozy. It takes place in like the English countryside, and it was just a lot of fun. I'm trying to look at my notes. Like I said, it was very fun and cozy, And I think one of my criticisms, I did give this one like a 3.5 out of 5 stars, is that like I didn't really feel the romance. I felt like the book very much focuses on the witchy side of the kind of the plot, where I didn't really get to really feel and see the relationship develop in a way that felt believable to me. Like it just didn't feel very believable in my sense. Like it was kind of very like basically it was like if you take the midnight rain lyrics where he was sunshine, I was midnight rain, but just like flip it where she's the sunshine and he's midnight rain. It's kind of like the grumpy and happy trope within the romance, but like I just didn't really feel the like involvement of that relationship, where it didn't feel very believable, and I couldn't really believe that these people were really falling in love in the few interactions that we see them have. So that was like my one criticism. And I did feel like the ending was a bit rushed, and like even though it is like a fantasy, I felt like there was some suspension of my like belief in this, because it just didn't seem very plausible. Like it felt too convenient. It was just unbelievable, if that makes sense. Even though there's fantastical elements, like I didn't feel like the ending was very believable, which I feel like it is. That was like my one criticism with this one, is that it just felt too rushed and too convenient and not very believable. But other than that, like it was just like a very cozy, vibey read, and it's definitely something a little bit lighter that I needed to read afterwards. Next up from the library, I got A Study in Drowning by Reid. And this book I gave a 3 out of 5 stars, and it was just fine in my opinion. It's kind of like a historical, dark academia fantasy, and kind of the way it follows this girl who submits this application to become one of the designers, or like an architect for her most beloved author who passed away. And while she's there's these kind of weird kind of things going on. And I will say, in terms of like the atmosphere, it was really a lot of fun. It was just like the kind of the spooky house where you feel something is off, kind of very much reminded me of Mexican Gothic. So I feel like in terms of atmosphere, it was really spot on. But I would say like the plot, like Effie, the main character, I did find to be really annoying. Like if I were to count how many times it says she was like crying or close to tears, like I was kind of at the point where I was like rolling my eyes at it, just because it just did not seem very believable to me, and it was just a little bit annoying with that thing. And then there's kind of this like forced romance too that I didn't, again, kind of find believable. And there's kind of just stupid like YA stuff where it's just like the timing of things, or like they forget something and that leads to like the kind of what's going on, to the unraveling and like reveal of everything, was just a little bit too convenient. And yeah, it was just very obvious what was kind of going on. But I did really enjoy the atmosphere. It just wasn't that great. So it was fine. It wasn't amazing, but I will say the atmosphere in this one was pretty good. And the last book that I ended up reading this month was The Once and Future Witches by Alix and Harrow. This book, I will say, was my favorite out of all the books that I read this month. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars, and this book is like over 500 pages, and I finished it within a couple days. Like I marathoned like 350 pages in one day. Like I couldn't put this book down, and that is a testament to how great and unique this book was. I said to my fiance, I'm like, you need to read this one. So it's on his list, and it was really a lot of fun. It's like a historical fantasy. So it follows 3 sisters who are growing up in the late 1800s, who are witches, who have had a falling out, but their paths cross and they become intertwined after this mysterious tower emerges from the town, and they are kind of forced into kind of working together to try to figure out what is going on. But while this is kind of brewing in the background, there's also kind of the rise of the suffragettes and women's rights, and kind of women being able to, you know, have the right to vote. So not only are these kind of witches living in secret, but they're also these kind of rise of these like women events going on. But I think this book was really fantastic. It really does a good job at showcasing the complexities of sisterhood and all those things, and I just loved all the characters. I just found them to be really fun, and especially seeing their growth and involvement throughout the course of this novel was just really fun to see. And the sacrifices that we make for our sisters or for the ones that we loved, I really loved how this kind of championed female friendships and the importance of having, you know, strong, meaningful female relationships, especially in a time where women were kind of frowned upon, or, you know, if people were different, like they were burned at the stake just because they were thought to be a witch. And I really like how the author integrated this historical time period and like witches in with the suffragettes movement. And yeah, it was just a lot of fun. There was a lot of, like, despite it having like kind of dark subject matter, I really found it to be really enjoyable. There was some humor intermixed into it, and it was really a lot of fun. And I still have my receipt from when I bought this, and it was December 29th, 2022. And I was like, I'm waiting until October to read this, just because I was like, it's witchy vibes. I need to read it in October. And it was definitely a good time to read it. It was like a really dreary, rainy weekend. Yeah, and I think this is probably one of my favorite books of all year. And the reason why I didn't give it 5 stars is that I did feel like it, especially toward the end, it dragged on a little bit, but it was still a fantastic read and definitely will probably make my favorite books of the year. So like I said, I held off reading this, and I'm kind of kicking myself for not picking it up sooner, but yeah, it was definitely worth the wait and kind of having the Halloween witchy vibe atmosphere to read it along with. So like I said, it was a pretty good read. So that's it for the books that I read in October. Let's go ahead and move on to my November TBR. First up, this is a book that I'm currently reading right now, and I have my book downstairs, so I just have the dust jacket, but this is a book that's been on my radar for a while, and I picked it up in October at my local bookstore. I've been doing a really good job at not like sticking to my book buying ban. I think I allowed myself to buy 14 books in the whole year because I really want to take down my TBR list, and I've done a really good job. So this is only the 9th book that I bought this year, and I don't think there's going to be really any books that I plan on buying for the rest of the year. So I've done a really good job, and I think I'm going to stick to my book buying ban into next year, just so I can take this TBR pile down. But moving on, this is one that's been on my radar for a while, and I was like, you know what, I'm at my local bookstore, and I've just been wanting to read this one for a really long time. And it just sounds super interesting. So it's kind of where it has like 3 different storylines that are interconnected through kind of plot. So it says, 2019, under the cover of darkness, Kate flees London for a ramshackle wayward cottage, inherited from a great aunt she barely remembers. With its tumbling ivy and overgrown garden, the cottage is worlds away from the abusive partner who tormented Kate. But she soon suspects that her great aunt had a secret, one that lurks in the bones of the cottage, hidden ever since the witch hunt of the 17th century. 1619. Elsa is awaiting trial for the murder of a local farmer who was stampeded to death by his herd. When Elsa was a girl, her mother taught her their magic, a kind not rooted in spell casting, but in a deep knowledge of the natural world. But unusual women have always been deemed dangerous, and as the evidence of witchcraft is laid out against Elsa, she knows it will take all of her powers to maintain her freedom. And then finally, 1942, as World War II rages, Violet is trapped in her family's grand crumbling estate. Straitjacketed by societal convention, she longs for the robust education her brother receives, and for her mother, long deceased, who is rumored to have gone mad before her death. The only traces Violet has of her are a locket bearing the initial W and the word Weyward scratched into the baseboard of her bed. Weaving together the stories of 3 extraordinary women across 5 centuries, Weyward is an astonishing debut, and it talks about female resistance. And yeah, I just think this is interesting. Like I said, I'm a sucker for interweaving different like past and present storylines, and I think it's interesting that this one has a more kind of fantastical element in it in terms of like witchcraft. So I'm very excited to finally read this one. I only read like the first couple pages, but so far I'm liking it. Next, I'm very much into a kind of like crime series mood, and I don't want to really talk too much about the plot of these ones, especially for crime novels. I don't really like to know too much about them. So the kind of two that I'll be reading are Devil's Way by Robert Bryznda and Movieland by Lee Goldberg. So for Robert Bryznda's Devil's Way, this is the next installment in the Kate Marshall series, and Kate Marshall was a homicide detective who 15 years ago like should have been at the height of her career when she caught the 9 Elms serial killer, but she ended up being torn apart by the media because she had a previous relationship with this person, and even though this is 15 years after the fact, she's still trying to piece together the after effects of this. So we gotta kind of just see her kind of grow and evolve, and she ends up becoming a private detective. So this is like the newest installment. And then this one follows Eve Ronan, who is the youngest homicide detective in Los Angeles, and she ended up kind of using a viral moment where she arrested a abusive celebrity, and she uses that as leverage to get a position in the very much male dominated homicide department in LA, and it kind of follows her going from this one. So this is again the next installment, but with crime series, I don't want to know too much about them, so that's why I'm kind of just talking about these very briefly. Kind of going on with fall, I feel like that's a really great time to read dark academia. So my next book that I want to kind of pick up is If We Were Villains by M.L Rio. And again, this is a book that my fiance read and he really liked it, and he said it does a good job at still, like, for kind of one of the themes or tropes with dark academia is having very unlikable characters, but despite that you're still really invested in the storyline. So it says, enter the players. There were 7 of us, then 7 bright young things with wide precious futures ahead of us. Until that year, we saw no further than the books in front of our faces. On the day Oliver Marks is released from jail, the man who put him there is waiting at the door. Detective Collarbone wants to know the truth, and after 10 years, Oliver is finally ready to tell it. A decade ago, Oliver is one of 7 young Shakespearean actors, a place of keen ambition in fierce competition. In this secluded world of firelight and leather-bound books, Oliver and his friends play the same roles on stage and off: hero, villain, tyrant, temptress, ingenue, and extra. But in their 4th and final reel, good-natured rivalries turn ugly, and on opening night, real violence invades the students' world of make-believe. In the morning, the 4th years find themselves facing their very own tragedy and their greatest acting challenge yet: convincing the police, each other, and themselves that they are innocent. This just seems like a really good, fun, dark academia to read, and I haven't read like a dark academia like this since I read A Secret History by Donna Tartt, which I really enjoyed. So I feel like this one is kind of very similar in vibes to that one. And lastly, this book just kind of screams like gray November vibes, and it is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. And I don't know, like it just kind of seems like November-y to me. But it says, Elsbeth Spindle needs more than luck to stay safe in the eerie mist-locked kingdom of Blunder. She needs a monster. She calls him the Nightmare, an ancient mercurial spirit trapped in her head. He protects her, he keeps her secret, but nothing comes for free, especially magic. When Elsbeth meets mysterious highwaymen of the forest road, her life takes a drastic turn. Thrust into a world of shadow and deception, she joins a dangerous quest to cure Blunder of the dark magic infecting it. Except the highwayman just so happens to be the king's own nephew, captain of the most dangerous men in Blunder, and guilty of high treason. So I think this one sounds interesting. I haven't really heard too much about this one, but it's one I picked up on a whim, and I think it is a series, so I'm hoping if I do really enjoy it, I'll have like a new series to kind of enjoy. But yeah, it was more of like I was looking at the books on my shelf, picking out which ones I wanted to read, and then this one just had the kind of gray November vibes that I was looking for. So yeah, I am excited to pick this one up as well. So that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what books you plan on reading this month and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.